If you're not subscribed to Wirepoints and their daily emails they send out, what are you waiting for? Go and make that happen, because I tell you, it's probably one of the most comprehensive ways to get an overview of really impactful stories from all different types of outlets. Listen, there's a lot of aggregators out there, but Wirepoints doesn't just aggregate. They also do independent research on everything from crime data to economic data to population data and how you're being impacted with your bottom line by all of this. Well, to talk more about what Wirepoints has going on, we are now joined by Mark Glennon. He is the founder of Wirepoints and somebody who I think is very instrumental in raising awareness about a whole host of issues. Mark, thanks for taking time with us this morning, and let's get right on into it. Let's talk about the First Amendment. We've had a lot of conversation on these airwaves about the Second Amendment with the gun ban challenge, how it's still held up in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, and all the other challenges there are to gun laws in Illinois, tied up in other courts. But the First Amendment still very much is something that people need to hold real close and protect against any threats. What kinds of threats are out there that people are having to protect against as we look at the landscape of legislation and lawsuits?
Greg, it's an onslaught. This is the free assault on free speech. In my view, is a direct threat to democracy. It couldn't be simpler. If you don't have free speech, you don't have the First Amendment. You don't have democracy. This is at the federal and state level. Unfortunately, Illinois has been part of it. For example, the bill passed and signed into law recently that restricts the activities of pro-life family counseling centers, passed into law, was just a flagrant violation of free speech. Fortunately, the federal courts still recognize the First Amendment, and a federal court, struck that down immediately, put an injunction on it, and really ridiculed the law and Kwame Raoul's defense of it.
I think the judge called it, quote, stupid and very likely unconstitutional. What's the purpose of this law? And is it lack clarity on exactly what they're going after with these pregnancy crisis centers?
Yes, it was totally one-sided. The allegation was that some of the counseling centers were harassing abortion patients as they went into abortion centers. And that would be inappropriate if it's happening. But this bill completely restricted their ability to pass out literature anywhere in the area. And it was one-sided. It said if the pro-choice people, the abortion center, did the same thing, there was no liability there, no exposure. That's called viewpoint discrimination. So that was a clear red line that legislatures cannot pass. And that really irritated the court.
So obviously that measure is challenged. It has been suspended on a preliminary injunction. Where do you foresee that particular challenge headed?
I think Kwame Raoul will let it die. He doesn't have the guts to appeal it. I wish he would. The Seventh Circuit would then further reaffirm what's going on here. They may try to amend the law. They'd have to really gut it to make it constitutional, or really just let it die. If he just lets it die, it would go to a full trial. I'm sure he wouldn't want that, because the judge would just rule the same way that he did preliminarily.
So what happens here? I mean, politically, what does that look like? Because, listen, they made a big deal out of this. It took up a lot of time at the State House. I remember watching these debates both in committee and on the floor of both the House and the Senate at the Illinois State House. They spent all this time and effort and all of the messaging behind it to, further certain political agendas, to, highlight one candidate over the other. Politically, what does that mean for? Should it be a wake-up call to people or something, or what should people take away from the fact that they may not appeal this?
That instance and many others, Greg, where there's, as I say, a full-out frontal assault in many ways against free speech. And politically, the far left that's in control has decided that they don't like free speech. And you see this again at the federal level with multiple agencies working in conjunction with tech platforms to suppress free speech. I think the most historic case coming up is something called Missouri v. Biden, where again the court slapped on this very broad injunction against the government jawboning and forcing tech platforms to suppress messages they didn't like. That too is up on appeal. I'm comfortable the Fifth Circuit will uphold the judge's ruling there. So people ought to be very frightened by this. And it's core now to what the left is doing. They're quite open about it. You have any number of left-wing law professors who dominate the law schools now openly calling for the end of free speech, or for strict limits on it, under the guise of misinformation or fake news or whatever. They have this all-out effort in place, and it's really not disguised anymore.
We're talking with Mark Glennon. He is the founder of Wirepoints, and the discussion about First Amendment issues. Of course, a lot of eyeballs on what happens with the social media working with the federal government to limit speech during COVID and elsewhere. But you've got that case here in Illinois about crisis pregnancy centers possibly being targeted by the state over deceptive practices. But that law is on hold. Another First Amendment case it deals with the issue of allowing for the state and individuals to file lawsuits against the firearms industry for either allegedly making the public less safe with their equipment, or for how they advertise to children, or for what the state deems illegal paramilitary or militia activity. That's been challenged in the courts as well. Yes, there's a firearms element to this, but how does that impact First Amendment rights?
That's probably another good example where I think the state is really just thumbing its nose at established law. This is under challenge effectively already because a couple other states have tried it. Those cases are already being tried. The Illinois law has not been challenged yet. They may not feel that's necessary because it's going to get resolved elsewhere. And then we have this new doxing law too, Greg, which prohibits attempts to prohibit the malicious form of doxing that we know, which is putting out personal information and effectively encouraging violence against people that you don't like. Well, it's vastly overwritten, horribly overbroad. Even the ACLU opposed this in the legislature. And I'm comfortable with it. When the right circumstance arises, that'll be challenged under First Amendment grounds as well.
Well, and how do you foresee that happening? Because I'm thinking, as a journalist, as a member of the media, as somebody who's broadcasting over the airwaves and publishing content that goes in newspapers and whatnot, and even with Wirepoints, you guys publish a lot of data. You get your hands on raw data, and sometimes it's, it might be the salary that a state employee makes, or what they're getting in their pension, or a variety of other what some people may consider personal information, but where's that line drawn, and how do you think this is going to be triggered into getting a potential lawsuit?
Well, the broadness of that definition of personal information is exactly where the ACLU got upset. It's really anything. You put up the name of the person along with almost anything else, such as where they work, that would trigger the law. And all it takes is one person to pop off. We talk about sensitive topics all the time. Some nut out there goes out and harasses the speaker or stalks them. That would trigger the law as well. Then you are liable for this. And you're right, Greg, there's no exemption for journalists, amazingly, in this, or politicians. This could well come back to bite the left, by the way, too. They do this all the time, encouraging demonstrations at judges' homes. Judge Kavanaugh, of course, had his life threatened. I've talked to some very good First Amendment lawyers on this, Greg, and in that particular case, you probably have to wait for a individual to be sued under that law and defend the case with the First Amendment.
We'll be watching all of this. And of course, as I said, if you're not already subscribed to Wirepoints, get to their website, subscribe, get those daily emails with a list of the important stories, but also access to their important independent work and delving into a variety of things. Mark, where can people find that and more?
Wirepoints.org, and sign up for our free daily newsletter. Again, we're very aggressive about making sure that we put up all viewpoints. We separate ours. We do a lot of research. We try to make our case with facts and data. That's our staple.
And I know we tap into the knowledge that Ted Dabrowski and John Klinger have, because the research they do is just pretty incredible to break down important numbers like economic factors, like tax dollars, like violent crime in Chicago, and more. So greatly appreciate you taking the time with us to talk about the First Amendment, which I don't know if people really understand why it's so important and significant to maintain and protect around every corner. Mark Glennon, founder of Wirepoints, thank you so much for taking time with us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
It is Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk.